The Raiders are moving on from their greatest quarterback of all time. It ended unceremoniously, from kicking out fans who support the QB to nervously benching Derek Carr before the last 2 games.
And had a good conversation with the quarterbacks this morning. And so we're going to go ahead and start Jarrett.
Carr tried to warn us that something fishy had been going on all year behind the scenes. But other than a few hints, he has chosen to keep his mouth shut.
I'm grateful for everyone that reached out that wanted to give me the platform to share my side, but I just don't feel like I should.
Most diehard Raiders fans know exactly what happened in 2022, but the general public has only heard the narrative that the Raiders have put out there, which is that Derek Carr just happened to regress under Josh McDaniels, and that Derek Carr alone, not Josh McDaniels, is solely responsible for the horrendous 2022 season. No team in NFL history has blown more double-digit leads than the Raiders in 2022. Whether it was bad luck, incompetence, or something more sinister, that will be something that people debate for years to come. But what we know with absolute certainty is that Derek Carr is a 4-time Pro Bowler who's consistently ranked top 10 to 15 among all QBs during his 9-year career. And he's the franchise record holder in passing TDs and yards for the Raiders. Josh McDaniels, who had tons of success with Tom Brady, somehow led Derek Carr to his worst statistical season since his rookie year. How did the Raiders add Davante Adams to a playoff team and somehow end up 6-11? And was this a plot to remove the franchise QB in a rebuild move like McDaniels did in Denver? The Raiders were trash for over a decade before Derek Carr. After former MVP Rich Gannon's exit, the Raiders cycled through several QBs. In 2014, in the second round with pick 36 of the NFL draft, they finally found their guy. But never before has there been such a controversial player for the Raiders. Derek Carr has almost completely split the fan base in half. Some believe that the Raiders organization has been too unstable and too dysfunctional, whether it's a first-round pick getting arrested or a broke owner getting fender benders, while others bemoan the fact that Derek Carr is not a dual-threat QB, or even go as far as mocking the fact that he is religious.
I praise the name of Jesus. These losses have been hard, but I praise the name of God because he stayed faithful through it all.
At the end of the day, the Raiders have never won a playoff game in Derek Carr's career. And even if that is not entirely the quarterback's fault, the quarterback at the end of the day is going to receive criticism.
Because of the way that I do live my life, they don't get to see the competitiveness in me. They don't get to see how much I love football.
I have a lot to prove to myself. I have a lot to prove to my organization. I'm being completely honest here. I'm tired of being disrespected.
But all of this changed for Derek Carr in 2020. After hearing about the noise that Tom Brady could have joined the Las Vegas Raiders before Gruden shut the deal down, Derek Carr went on to ball out in the 2020 season. He finally beat Patrick Mahomes, allowing Gruden to gloat with a bus ride around Arrowhead.
I mean, you could find a smart aleck bus driver in Kansas City who made some snide comments when we got on the bus. Maybe that's why we drove around the stadium, just to tick him off. You know, this is ridiculous. Next question.
But just like his entire career with the Raiders, he still had one of the worst defenses in the NFL. 2021 would be the year where Derek Carr would lift off under John Gruden. Derek Carr was even rumored to be a dark horse MVP candidate.
It reminded me so much of my career so far. A lot of this, you know what I'm saying? I'm thankful for this group.
Eventually, John Gruden would be canceled for emails about Roger Goodell, and Derek Carr would lose his head coach and job security from the past 4 years. Special teams coach Rich Bisaccia filled in as interim head coach, and the Raiders fought hard despite all the adversity. Their number 1 star wide receiver Henry Ruggs got into a tragic DUI accident, ending his short career, and Derek Carr had to navigate all of these tragedies from John Gruden to Henry Ruggs as the spokesperson for the Raiders team.
I mean, I'm sick about it. I have a lot of emotions. Angry, sick, upset, mad, frustrated, all those things. On a roller coaster, so to speak, this year, you know. I do sit back and I think, did I not let him know that he really could, I'd be there for him at 3 a.m., you know,
The Raiders would still somehow make the playoffs despite all these setbacks. But without John Gruden and Henry Ruggs, the passing game declined towards the back half of the 2021 season, and the Raiders were narrowly eliminated by the Cincinnati Bengals, who would go on to reach the Super Bowl. And now Derek Carr was left in a precarious situation, with 1 year remaining on his contract and a interim head coach. The players would rally in the media to keep head coach Rich Bisaccia because they knew that any new head coach would bring changes to the roster and maybe even changes to the quarterback position.
Has to be a commitment that they're going to give him what he needs to succeed.
After the season, David Carr would go on the Colin Cowherd show and talk about how the Raiders need to make a commitment to Derek Carr.
I can't guarantee that Derek is going to want to sign up for that if it's going to be the same thing that he's done over the last 7 or 8 years.
Josh McDaniels would eventually be hired, and Mark Davis would go on to say that the upcoming season is not a rebuild.
Now we're just moving to the next level, and that it's not a rebuild, it's not a reload, it's just taking this to the next level and getting to that Super Bowl and winning some championships.
And Derek Carr appeared optimistic about the future. Mark Davis made jokes about David Carr's comments on Cowherd, which now appears suspect.
Well, I was thinking about trading Carr, but it's David, not Derek.
The Raiders would trade for Devontae Adams. Derek would reunite with his former Fresno State teammate. The draft would be hosted in Las Vegas, and the Raiders looked like one big happy family. At the time, many believed the Raiders were going on a Super Bowl run. Who would have predicted that it would be one of the worst seasons in recent memory? What most people neglected at the time was Derek Carr's contract extension. It appeared like a multi-year deal. The 1 year out in the contract was never really mentioned. The Raiders GM Dave Ziegler dismissed comments about the 1 year out in Carr's contract.
How the contract was built and all those, different types of things. People can look into all those things and create different storylines. And the extension was longer than 1 year, and it was longer than 1 year for a reason.
But the odd contract and the 1 year out would make more sense as the season transpired. The Raiders ended up 6-11 after all the hype in the offseason. The addition of Chandler Jones with Max Crosby somehow made the defense worse and one of the worst in the NFL. Early season injuries to slot receiver Hunter Renfrow and tight end Darren Waller robbed the offense of the dynamic receiving core. All in all, Adams, Waller, and Renfrow only played at most 64 snaps together with Derek Carr. But none of this was the largest obstacle that the Raiders faced in 2022. 9 of the Raiders' 11 losses were one-possession games, meaning they were in almost every game. The Raiders would be successful in the first half of games and then mysteriously collapse. Many fans, even local reporters, questioned the suspiciously bad play calling, despite fans calling for Josh McDaniels to be fired. Owner Mark Davis's only statement during the season when the Raiders were 2-7 was that the head coach Josh McDaniels was doing a fantastic job. This sounded tone deaf to most fans, considering the fact that Davis assured them early in the offseason that this was not a rebuild. Derek Carr looked uncomfortable and awkward. It was reported that he had less freedom at the line of scrimmage under Josh McDaniels, and there were rumors that the coach and QB had disagreements about play calls even when they had won. His brother David, after Derek was benched, would post articles that criticized McDaniels' in-game decisions, and he promised fans and the curious public that he would explain on a podcast what really happened this season.
I know the Raider fans are excited to dig into this, to learn about what happened inside the walls in Las Vegas. We're excited to tell you, but I think we're gonna have to wait a little bit.
Derek seemed to hint throughout the 2022 season that something was up with McDaniels. Obviously, he knew Josh McDaniels had job security with Mark Davis's 4-year commitment to him, and after a devastating loss to the Jaguars, Carr made some comments that made it seem like something was going on that he could not speak on.
I think there's a lot I want to say. But if I'm honest, I don't need to say it here,
Notably, he's talking about coaches and not players, despite some of the contrary reports by team-friendly reporters.
I feel like I've been in this situation a lot where new coaches or this or that, and you have to teach the new guys, like, this is how we do it, and this is the mentality, and that gets tiring, but at the same time, it's my job, so.
The following week, the Raiders lost to the Colts, led by Jeff Saturday, a historically unqualified high school coach and TV analyst who had zero experience in the NFL. Many fans at the time felt like Josh McDaniels could be tanking, and losing to such an unqualified opponent felt like further proof. It was after this disastrous game that Derek Carr had his most emotional press conference ever. Keep in mind, Derek Carr held it together after losing his head coach and his #1 wide receiver in a tragic homicide in 2021. But for some reason, it was this Colts game that finally broke him down. He talked about how players sacrifice so much of their bodies just to play, which made fans think he was talking about the coaches, the implication being people who are not putting their bodies on the line.
I'm just pissed off about some of the things, you know, that a lot of us try and do just to practice. What we put our bodies through just to sleep at night.
Local reporters tried to spin this presser as if it was about players who are on IR like Darren Waller, but Derek Carr clarified that it was not about a player, and he would never shame a player for being on IR because he himself has suffered tragic injuries throughout his career. These moments made many think that Derek Carr is talking about Josh McDaniels. And McDaniels, when asked about Derek Carr's statements at these emotional press conferences, said, oh, you know, he has no idea what he's talking about.
I think you'd have to ask him, you know, more specifically what he was or wasn't referring to. I can't speak to what he was referring to specifically.
We've heard reports that the Raiders made the decision to move on from Derek Carr early into the 2022 season, with the suspect play calling the horrible record helping the Raiders secure the 7th overall pick in the 2023 draft, plus the 1 year out in his contract. Derek Carr could probably sense this was the end. The Raiders benched Derek Carr to avoid him getting injured and securing guaranteed injury money. They reportedly suggested that he stay home to avoid being a distraction. David Carr would then reference Mark Davis's joke that he made early in the 2022 offseason.
There's some things going on. They're trying to work a trade. Derek has to accept the trade. Mark Davis tried to trade me once. That didn't work out. See how it works out for him with my brother.
Derek Carr's no trade clause allowed him to have leverage at the end of the season. Carr visited the Saints, but he would refuse to waive his no trade clause for the Saints or for any team in the NFL because it made no sense for him to do that. The Raiders had to release him by February 15th to avoid his contract becoming fully guaranteed. And because the Carr family is clearly not okay with how the Raiders handled this situation, they obviously do not want to help the Raiders get a draft pick and also don't want Derek Carr's new team to lose a draft pick. And so the Raiders would release Carr, their franchise quarterback, and he would become a free agent in 2023 for the first time in his career. The Raiders are trying to claim that Derek Carr just mysteriously regressed, despite the fact that coaching is obviously to blame for second half collapses. And Carr said in some rough audio that unlike previous coaches, he never knew where he stood with McDaniels.
Depending on who the coach was and all those kind of things, they definitely let me know how they felt. And so, now this situation was different, and it is what it is.
The odd question is, why would the Raiders go and trade for Davante Adams if they were planning on moving on from Derek Carr anyway? David Carr made it clear that the trade to send Davante from Green Bay to Vegas was all Derek.
The Packers and the Raiders weren't going to trade, right? They got on the phone and made it happen. So he's bringing people in the entire time. Is he appreciated for that? No.
Did the Raiders only keep Carr for this 1 year just to lure Davante Adams to Vegas? Did they expect Tom Brady to reunite with Josh McDaniels, but then he suddenly retired? And did Josh McDaniels sabotage Derek Carr to help justify moving on from him? Or was this all just a freak accident? We may never know the full story about what happened with the Raiders in 2022 unless somebody writes a book on it.
I don't plan on ever really talking about it unless I get crazy and write a book someday. I don't plan on ever really talking about it unless I get crazy and write a book someday.
There is no question that this will be remembered as one of the strangest seasons in not only the Raiders, but NFL history. How could a team with such high expectations collapse like this in an improbable fashion? Give us your thoughts on the 2022 season with the Raiders and Derek Carr in the comments below. If you like watching Raiders content, then check out some of our other videos on WiFiWillie Raiders. We upload Raiders content almost every single day. My name is WiFiWillie. Peace out, and I hope you have a good one.